All right, well, let's get started. Our goal in the presentation today is that when you are talking about the cloud with someone, you're generally going to find yourself in one of two different conversations. There are the eager evangelists, and then there are those who are trembling in their boots in fear. And it's very important to acknowledge that both of these views are very valid views, especially if the person that you're talking to doesn't really understand the risks and the benefits of cloud computing. Our goal is that by the end of this presentation, you will be balanced somewhere between the picture on the left here, someone who's too afraid to move into the cloud, and somewhere on the right where we've got people recklessly uploading your work and personal life to any APIs that will listen. So security is a way of life for business these days. It is very much a situation where we have gone, in a matter of a few years, gone from management that refused to buy into spending budget on IT security at all, to really all levels of management requiring robust security postures. Even now, in the days of frozen budgets, it's really one of the few areas that budgets are still open for. And I think Ela's controlling our slides. Ela, can you move to the next slide there? So I'll do a little bit of an interactive piece here, so you guys, I know, can all chat into the webinar here. I'm going to ask a question. So we've mentioned that while security is ever more important, it's something people are actually pushing budget out there for. And yet, with security being so important, those of you on the call, chat in, what % of companies do you think have at least one critical security misconfiguration in their cloud deployment right now? And remember, this is security and critical, right? Not just a small security flaw, but a critical security flaw that was found. I'll give everybody a couple of seconds to answer there. Jacob, do you mind showing me the results here? I want to see if anybody got a good guess in here. No guesses at all. Okay, all right. Well, I'll just let you guys know. If you'll click again, Ela, what you'll see is that a threat stack study that was done in AWS in 2017 showed that an inventory throughout the AWS system, that 73% of the cloud systems configured in AWS at that time had a critical security misconfiguration. So we know that was 2017. We know that was only AWS. So we know that number has certainly increased. But it's very important that we have proof that many organizations that may have been very quick to adopt cloud computing have been very slow to adopt cloud computing security. So in our implementations, we've really found there are two misconceptions contributing to this issue. First is that admins seem to think that their existing network-based cybersecurity infrastructure is sufficient to protect against cloud applications. And the second misconception leading to these security misconfigurations is they tend to believe that the app providers are responsible for securing the customer data. Now, one of the scariest things about jumping or even wading into the cloud is that fear of the unknown. We have certified cloud architects and engineers that are just not as common yet as experienced network and system admins who've been managing infrastructure and configuring Cisco firewalls for years. In fact, it's honestly just downright hard to find good cloud architects. Trust me, I spend a lot of time looking for them. And the majority of IT personnel in your small corporate and really even in enterprise America just simply doesn't have the training or the experience to feel comfortable securely deploying or managing critical systems in the cloud right now. And this is the kind of fear that really comes with IT wisdom. So you know that it needs to be done right. You don't quite feel qualified to do it yourself, and you really should have a lot of questions. So Ela's going to tell us what we can do to address that fear.
All right, so how do we deal with these unknowns? Because as Michelle mentioned, moving to the cloud is great. It reduces the operational burden of managing infrastructure. It enables efficiency and productivity. However, with great power comes great responsibility. There are still a lot of variables to consider and manage when running workloads in the cloud. So for example, from a SaaS perspective, you have to worry about managing users across all your SaaS apps. You have to worry about data sprawl, right? Data in Salesforce and Google Drive and email and Dropbox. There's all types of activity you have to account for, like external users being added to a Slack channel. And then from the public cloud perspective, you have to worry about project sprawl and resource sprawl and identity and access management sprawl. And all types of different configurations that can increase your chances of account compromise. And we're finding that not a lot of companies are aware of the vulnerabilities introduced by many of the default configurations of these platforms, and they're not aware of all the tools the cloud providers make available to harden their infrastructure and IT footprint. And account management best practices and super admin best practices aren't always followed. So our recommendation is to have an expert or a partner that you can lean on for extra technical muscle, because it helps prevent technical debt, it illuminates blind spots, and ensures you get it done right the first time. And not only that, a good partner will help you develop your internal talent along your cloud journey. And also on this slide, for developing your talent internally, just wanted to share some of the resources that have helped me develop on my cloud journey along the way. So Linux Academy is a good resource. A Cloud Guru just merged with Linux Academy. I haven't used them, but I've heard good things. And Quick Labs is also a platform that I use a lot.
So that leads us really to the next terrifying thing about the cloud, is that it might be too easy to just get started. So while those of us that are veterans in IT know to be cautious, those that might not be in IT at all actually have a really low barrier to entry. In fact, the speed at which a new cloud service can be adopted is truly a double-edged sword. On one side, it's really great for responding to new and emerging business needs really rapidly. And on the other, there's that temptation to accelerate through or even bypass the usual processes designed to make sure things are done properly. Even worse, those low barriers to entry mean that most likely you have shadow and stealth IT in your organization right now. A 2018 semantic study survey found that on average, there are 40 times as many IT solutions in your network as you think there are. And while there's a study that can back this up, we went and looked for this study because it's what we experience all the time with our own customers. We see time and time again that when we are doing a cloud strategy planning, you are talking to an organization that they actually have good policies in place. But we find out that there is a whole department that they didn't know about using Smartsheets or Firebase. Or the most common one we see is an entire team who's already exploring ML analytics in the cloud, but hasn't really consulted with IT on how that fits into the larger cloud strategy. Now, there's a lot of debate on how to handle shadow IT. The questions are, should you be trying to stop it completely, or should you accept it as the new norm and put all the safety rails that you can in place? Well, a lot of your decision on your stance should depend on the challenges and the risks in your own organization. So, for example, if you have PCI and PHI data in your network, be afraid. It's absolutely valid, because you'll see that the same semantic shadow data report that was done in 2018 found that shadow and stealth IT contributed to 1% of broadly shared files containing confidential data. Now, 1% doesn't really sound very terrible at first, but when you dig into that data that's being broadly shared behind your back, you'll actually see that 13% of all PCI data that is in the cloud is actually overexposed. 18% of all PII data known to be in the cloud is overexposed. And then there's a really terrifying one that 56% of PHI data that is being broadly shared in the cloud right now through various means is overexposed for one reason or another. Well, what are those one reason or another, right? It's how is shadow IT overexposing your confidential data? Well, the Stealth IT survey by Canopy found that the main cause for overexposure of your sensitive data is file sharing software and archiving software. In fact, 36% of that was file sharing software. So you're looking at things like Office 365, Dropbox, Box, Evernote. Those are the biggest ways that you're going to be overexposing that sensitive data.
Okay, so how do we manage this? Well, I would say that there are two categories of shadow IT in the cloud. One is on the SaaS side, so applications like G Suite and Salesforce and Slack, and the other is with the public cloud like GCP and AWS. So the things you have to worry about do differ a little bit for each category, but there's also a lot of overlap. So in both categories, you need good governance, you need good change control. What do I mean by that? One thing you need is good risk management. On the SaaS side, there are risks unique to each vendor, and there are risks associated with having to manage so many applications. And from the public cloud perspective, you need to understand the risks associated with the workloads you have running and plan to have running, and with the way your account is managed as well. You want to have a good vetting process for these SaaS applications and cloud providers. Make sure they provide features that are secure and make your life easier, like federation, and make sure they support data access via API. You want to have policies well defined and communicated, and you want to have good change control. So for example, just like in the on-prem world, you don't want engineers to make uncontrolled and ad hoc changes to network devices. It's the same in the cloud. You don't want people to be able to make unaccounted changes, whether SaaS or public cloud. And so once you understand these risks and you have your policies well defined, you may want to put some preventive measures in place to help manage these risks. So on the SaaS side, G Suite has a lot of tools that can help manage shadow IT, and we'll get into some specifics in the upcoming slides. For the public cloud side of things, some of the things you could do is implement policy as code. So after you've gone through the process of understanding the risks and defining your policies, you can codify some of these policies and test your infrastructure as code for policy violations, which would prevent any infrastructure as code from being deployed if it does violate any policies. You want to employ the principle of least privilege, which essentially means that everyone should have only the permissions needed to do their job and no more than that. So you want to limit the number of people who can make risky changes and limit the number of super admin accounts. And then you also want to employ the separation of duties, which is the concept that risky changes require more than one person to implement that change. From a detection perspective, you want to monitor your environment for risky changes. You want to make sure you have an accurate inventory of the resources in your environment. Forseti is a great tool for monitoring projects at scale. If you have a lot of projects in your GCP account, you may not know if each project has the same Stackdriver settings across all projects. So Forseti allows you to apply uniform monitoring across all your projects. And on the incident management side of things, you want to alert and automatically revert changes to desired configurations. And the cloud, one of the many benefits is that it makes things like auto remediation very easy to do.
Another thing that isn't really unique to the cloud, but does have additional attack vectors in the cloud, is the fear of account takeovers. One of the primary things that we like to watch for when we are detecting account takeovers are things like login location. And that's definitely one thing that's become less precisioned with the remote workforce and the sprawl of the cloud. So when you're connecting to SaaS applications to the cloud through OAuth, and that's also a very common thing that we see, that it was something new, something we didn't really see as much on the on-prem side. And when you're dealing with the cloud, you need to look out for and remove risky or malicious OAuth connections now. So how do we manage all of that? And more importantly, what's so scary about account takeovers anyways? Because I know from my perspective, before I jumped into the cloud world, I thought account takeovers were mostly something that happened on your personal accounts, but they're growing and they're expanding. It's not just someone after your financial accounts anymore. The ATO fraud losses in 2018 were actually 164% higher than in 2017, and they were found to be impacting business and additional account vectors, and they're continuing to grow all the way into 2020. So your exposed passwords that come with an account takeover can be used to access company data and resources. So, obviously there's the step one, make sure everyone isn't just using the same passwords for accounts in business and personal, but there's also how do we protect those company accounts for the control that we don't have over users. And then as far as the OAuth goes, we've actually put here kind of a common workflow that we see. This is, actually, while there are some specifics in this example, the workflow is very common. And the question is, how do we address that in the cloud?
Okay, so how do we defend against account takeover? So for the attack vector that was presented in the last slide, platforms like G Suite have features that allow you to control which third-party and domain-owned apps can access sensitive data via OAuth. So you want to make sure that you have features like this enabled. If the victim in the previous example would have had this enabled, it would have been impossible for the malicious website to have been granted access to that data. You also want to make sure that you have multi-factor authentication enforced. This helps prevent account takeover in the event of password compromise. SMS-based is the least secure form, but it's better than nothing. And physical auth tokens is on the more secure side of the spectrum. And then apps-based is in between the two. For super admin best practices, you want to make sure your super admin accounts are not used for day-to-day activities. You want to create alerts for OAuth grants to privileged accounts, because your privileged account should never be granting access via OAuth. From a access context manager standpoint, what this is access levels describe the necessary requirements for access to resources to be granted. So for example, you can limit access to resources based on whether the request is coming from company issued devices, in addition to other factors like MFA and whether the OS has been updated. And then Google also provides cloud identity, which is Google's identity as a service platform. This protects against login abuse detection, which prevents brute force attacks. You can configure session length control to reduce the risk of damage in case you fall victim to session hijacking. You can temporarily suspend accounts suspected to be compromised. So these are among many of the other things that cloud identity enables to help prevent account takeover.
This one's my favorite, data breaches. So data breaches has to be the most universally terrifying thing about the cloud. You've got the thought of someone maliciously or accidentally spewing your data into the public cloud and the dark web. And it's most often the result of all the other scary security threats. And then it results in your name and in your transgressions being published into headlines and talked about in webinars just like this one for years to come. Data security is, in fact, the most discussed topic amongst our customers. So while Dido has helped on the cloud journey many customers, when you're talking to those customers, I liken it to the nightmare that everyone has, where you walk into work and you realize you don't have any clothes on for some reason. So while we all have that fear, which, of course, the data security fear, I mean, because we all work remotely, so the other nightmare is solved. The data security fear is a very valid fear. I would argue that assuming that just because your data is sitting on-prem or behind your firewall, that it is somehow safer than in the cloud architecture of AWS, Azure, or other behemoth cloud providers, it's really just incorrect. In fact, it's often the safer option when you consider the limitation of your on-prem infrastructure to have it out in the larger cloud structures. Think of it this way. All of you that are working in IT can attest that budgets for IT infrastructure can be very tight because infrastructure doesn't always qualify as security. So compare that to the budgets and the resources of Amazon, AWS, or Google. You know, if you haven't watched some of the YouTube videos on Google's data centers, I highly recommend it for any IT geek. It's better than Fort Knox. It's fantastic video to watch and kind of see some of the security protocols that they have on even just the physical security of those servers. And not to steal Ela's thunder, but some of the cool things that come out of some of these cloud behemoths on the data security side are, you know, Google just announced that they can not only encrypt your data at rest and in transit, but they can actually encrypt it while it's in use. And that is just not the kind of security that you can get in your on-prem networks. So this next slide will depart slightly from the cloud focus of the webinar because the truth is studies really show that among the top 5 causes of data breaches, most of them are actually made easier to protect against in the cloud. So very valid fear, not necessarily something that is the highest concern in the cloud. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not implying at all that there are no data security issues to worry about in the cloud, but that none of them are unique to the cloud. So when you go through these causes and the way that we protect against them, the cloud has actually done a fantastic job of giving us tools to work against this that are sometimes hard to piece together on-prem. So what are some of those, Ela?
Okay, so for data breaches, there really isn't a single specific thing that you can do to prevent a breach. Defending against a data breach requires multiple levels of defense. So here we have listed some of the things you should be doing or thinking about doing. From an encryption standpoint, GCP provides encryption at rest by default for data in cloud storage and persistent disk, and even in memory, as Michelle mentioned, which is a big differentiator for GCP. And they provide encryption at rest for their other data storage services as well. You can also always encrypt the data yourself, but you want to make sure you have a good key management process in place. And you know, if you don't want to deal with that overhead, Google has taken care of this for you by default. And for super sensitive data, this is something that you might want to consider. For access control lists, you want to make sure they're monitored and change controlled. You want to make sure that you're aware of all the buckets and objects that are available to the public. You want to label and tag your stored data in terms of sensitivity and align controls with that level of sensitivity. For data loss prevention on the G Suite side of things, you can prevent users from sharing sensitive content in Google Drive with people outside of your organization. You can scan outbound email for sensitive content, and GCP has a data loss prevention service as well. Monitoring, alerting, auto remediation. You may want to detect and auto remediate things like unplanned firewall changes. The cloud allows you to do this. It makes it very easy. MFA, not only does it defend against account takeover, a byproduct of that is that it keeps your data safe. And zero trust. So what that is traditionally access control has been based on the perimeter, where devices like firewalls are used to protect resources on the corporate network from outsiders. So if a device is on your corporate network, it makes it easier to access resources and workloads. What zero trust is it's a security model based on the idea that we can't trust anything on the network. So access to all resources are based on multiple levels of authentication. So your identity, the device you're requesting from, the OS type. There's multiple factors that you can define to limit who can access your resources. Google has both a G Suite and GCP implementation of this concept called Beyond Corp. So I encourage you to learn more about that. And on the infrastructure side of things and the cloud architectural best practices, some things you want to do is limit the number of resources with publicly routable IP addresses. Resource isolation, you want to have some level of separation between your prod and your other environments. From a GCP standpoint, you want your prod environment to be in its own project. And also GCP provides a feature called VPC service controls, which is a way to prevent data exfiltration from your projects. And lastly, the graphic on the bottom right is a graphic illustrating the zero trust concept. So on the right of the image, you have all the IT services that employees and partners may want to access. And in order to access these resources, we create rules around identity and device context and enforce these rules whenever anyone wants to access the resources on the right. So these are just some of the techniques that can be used to defend against a data breach.
And then there's the last fear that we wanted to talk to you about today is the fear of multiple platforms and systems that we have to manage. So as an illustration, how many of you since March of this year have been introduced to some new collaboration platform that you've never used before? While that move to remote work and video conferencing has really accelerated everyone's move into the cloud, and enterprises are now really seeing the cloud as a digital transformation engine, as well as technology that improves business continuity. So as work was forced to go remote due to stay-at-home orders, the tasks were largely done on cloud infrastructure. And we've seen collaboration tools such as Microsoft Teams and Google Meet become cogs in companies' broader cloud ecosystem. That also means, though, that as IT teams, we're really thrust into this broad array of platforms and systems all over the cloud ecosystem. So multi-cloud is clearly in our futures. So now all of the previous fears that we've had around what to do in a cloud are compounded because we can't just pick a cloud, make it safe, and be done with it. We have to find out and figure out how to integrate our business process services, application services, and integrate those with our infrastructure services. And they all have different threats and different configurations. And the speed at which everything is moving to the cloud and the broad landscape of services is really overwhelming. And every single system could be your weakest link. Now I tell my favorite story because when I am giving security presentations, the weakest link is a part of really in probably every security presentation you've ever heard. My favorite story about this was a casino back in 2017, which if you've ever worked with casinos, they are generally very segmented, very locked down network. But this casino was breached through a smart fish tank. The fish tank had sensors connected to a PC that regulated things like the temperature, the food, the cleanliness, things like that. But a hacker was able to use the fish tank to get a foothold in the network and then move through the network, find the high roller database, and send data back through the fish tank to the cloud. So while that is, again, my favorite and most entertaining example of a weakest link cloud device, it's really important to realize that it could be anything. It could be your HAVAC system. Look at Target. It could be your CCTV cameras. Or these days, think about all of the webcams that everyone's buying to work remotely from work right now. So really, access control in this new world where everyone is remote and everything is connected to the cloud is alarming at best. And there are a lot of ways that we can help mitigate that.
So to manage multiple platforms and devices, one thing you want to do is have a good vetting process for your SaaS applications and cloud providers that you're considering adding to your portfolio of subscriptions. You want to make sure they provide features that are secure and make your life easier, like federation, as mentioned before. So federation allows you to synchronize the identities from a single source of truth, like your HR system. So this helps keep the identities across all your cloud providers in sync with your single source of truth, and it ensures lifecycle events such as terminations or suspensions are processed across all your cloud providers. Another thing that you're going to want from your providers is single sign-on support. So single sign-on is an authentication scheme that allows a user to log in with a single ID and password. And with that, they're able to access multiple independent software systems. So for example, I log into G Suite, that automatically logs me into Salesforce. So the benefits of that is it reduces password fatigue, it simplifies username and password management, it improves identity protection. If I require access to an app to be via single sign-on, if I remove that user from the identity provider, their access is automatically removed from all other apps that require access via single sign-on. So you want your providers to support that. The other thing, you want to make sure that they have good APIs. They support data access via these APIs. This lets you automate a lot of the operational tasks involved in managing multiple platforms. And again, zero trust is a big thing here. Don't trust anything in your network, essentially. And finally, you want to understand the unique risks of each of these systems that you're considering adding to your portfolio. So for example, the risks associated with using Slack might be different than the risks associated with using GitHub. So you want to make sure that you're aware of all the risks that are unique to each system.
Thanks, Ela. So this clearly wasn't an extensive list of everything you need to watch out for in the cloud journey. But if we've achieved our goal in this limited presentation, you should walk away feeling either a little less afraid than you were if you were one of the people who are paralyzed by fear, or a little more afraid if you were one of the cloud Kool-Aid drinkers. And my final piece of advice to you on all of these fears is, something that will kind of come full circle around on is don't try and tackle it on your own. Get a second opinion. One cloud architect, a consultant, a cloud partner. And there's just really too many nuances for one person to perfect the entire journey for an organization. Think about it. just like on-prem, we have different specialists. We have a database admin. We have a system admin. So when DIDA comes in and conducts, say, a security posture review on an existing implementation, we have multiple engineers across multiple specialties that are looking for risks. And trying to build out that team on your own is really, honestly, the most expensive and slowest way to tackle this. So, augment, learn, and grow into it. And depending on where you are in your cloud journey, you could need strategy consulting. You might need actual assistance with implementation or deployment, or you really might just need someone to review what you've already implemented. So when you are looking for that partner or a consultant, someone to come in and help you, here are a list of topics that we recommend that you have reviewed or assisted with to help protect you. Now, this part of the presentation is going to get interesting because what I really wanted to do was open up for questions and, talk about navigating multiple platforms. I'll peek behind the curtains for you guys. I am actually looking at a Google Meet presentation that our marketing team is showing me because the go-to webinar doesn't support Pixelbooks. So I'm going to ask Jacob, our marketing person, to go ahead and give me any questions that have come in, since I can't see those typed myself. But please open up any questions that you have for myself or Ela on what is your biggest fear? What would you like to know how to solve? Or even just what we've seen in the industry with what we're working on. Okay. All right, so the question here was, let's see. Oh, is this a question? It looks like, are you looking for someone who we highly recommend as a third-party cyber audit, or absolutely would agree that absolutely you should have a third-party cyber audit performed, and again, not just on one system. Sometimes there are different teams that can specialize on different types of systems. Are you doing a data audit? Are you doing an infrastructure audit? So look into those pieces as well. No other questions at all? All right. How do orgs deal with consultants with distributed workforces and dealing with access to PII data? Great question. So that's where, and I'll let Ela jump in on some of the technical pieces, but depending on what platforms you're using, for example, G Suite has ways to actually control PII data, and so that comes into your labeling. So step one, identify what the PII data is, and then there are the different platforms that you can use to protect how it's shared. And even as a distributed workforce, the most important place to look for that is going to be in those file sharing. If you'll kind of remember back, that's where most of it gets exposed. So if you are using Office 365, if you're using Dropbox, if you're using G Suite, it's looking for the controls that you have there that can label and then protect the sharing of how that's put out there. And then Ela, if you can speak to also an important aspect of it is just giving access to that PII data in the first place, whatever database it's sitting in, and how we address that on the remote access side.
Yeah, so one way to manage that is platforms like GCP and G Suite are able to alert on external users that are able to access your PII data. So it allows you to monitor for things like that.
And as far as what are the best services for sharing files securely, I'll admit my bias up front. As a Google organization, where we have the best luck with Drive under the G Suite platform because of the data labeling and kind of the granular controls that you can put in place. to make sure you can put time limits on how long someone's able to see it. You can control very specifically who in, whether it's just in the organization, what domain, or even a specific person. And then you can also see history of anybody who has viewed the file. So you can go in and see if someone else has shared it. You can even run audit reports on, to see who has this been shared with. So to control the issue of, all right, I shared this with someone. Are they able to share it out with someone else? And if so, can I see who it was? So that's my bias, obviously, is going to be on the G Suite Drive side. I think that there are security elements to most of the major with Dropbox and Box that you'll find. But with any platform, it's making sure that you fully understand. And if you don't fully understand, you're working with someone who fully understands the security settings, the configurations that need to be in place to make that platform secure. All right, guys. Well, I really appreciate the attendance today and the interaction. If you do have additional questions, absolutely feel free to reach out to us. In any way, we're out there on the web. That's the public side of us, and we are always happy to answer questions. And we will also be sending a follow-up email if you happen to be in a place where you think that a security posture review would be a benefit to your organization. For any of you guys who came through our marketing tunnel, you already know this, but we are offering 10% off of our basic security posture assessment. So that will be part of that follow-up email that you get if that's something that you're interested in. But again, if there's anything that we can help you with, that's what we're here for. Yeah, thanks you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.